Om Sahana Vavatu Sahana Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadi Tamastu Mavit Vishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. And we'll share the screen here. Share. June 29th in Asia. Here we are. First topic. Continuing with the topic 5 Gems of Wisdom from the Tirukural. Little review here. In our last session on Gems of Wisdom from the Choral, I presented the first 2 gems. The first gem was the traditional Hindu view of what is needed for our spiritual well-being on planet Earth that is found in the titles of the 4 chapters of the prologue. God, rain, sannyasins, and dharma. Second gem of wisdom was the first theme from the Way of the Householder section, which is possessing love. Today begins with the third gem of wisdom, which is the second theme from the Way of the Householder. What do you think that might be? What of the many themes in the Choral would I pull out? We will begin this topic with a question before we give the answer. What is the purpose of earning wealth and establishing a home? What do you think the answer would be? The purpose of earning wealth and establishing a home. The common answer, of course, would be something along the lines of to provide shelter, food, and the other necessities of life to our immediate family members, husband, wife, children, and any parents living with us. The answer the Choral gives is quite different. It says the purpose of earning income and establishing a home is to provide hospitality to guests. Wonder how many of you remembered that. To provide hospitality to guests. In other words, to give a place from where we can be charitable. This idea is found in chapter 9 entitled Hospitality. The complete verse, which is the first one in the chapter, reads, "The whole purpose of earning wealth and maintaining a home is to provide hospitality to guests." To emphasize the importance of giving, Tiruvalluvar devotes an entire chapter to this one topic, which is chapter 22, entitled Understanding One's Duty to Give. The second verse in this chapter clearly states the poet's message. It is to meet the needs of the deserving that the worthy work so hard to acquire wealth. Number of verses give charming analogies of how the wealth the family has acquired can benefit all. Verse 2:17 reads, "In the hands of a generous man, wealth is like a medicinal tree whose healing gifts help all." Some of the refinements of hospitality Tiruvalluvar mentions in the verses of this chapter are: be generous in feeding the guest, even when the meal is an elaborate and expensive one. Don't feel you have done enough when feeding a few guests. Hope that even more will come. It's a beautiful verse that ends the chapter on hospitality, which reads, The delicate anicham flower withers when merely smelled, but an unwelcome look is enough to wither a guest's heart. That's a beautiful verse. Just a look. There's an interesting verse in this chapter which reads, "Charity's merit cannot be measured by gifts given. It is measured by measuring the receiver's merits." There is also a second verse on this idea. "Help rendered another cannot be measured by the extent of assistance given. Its real measure is the recipient's worthiness." Same idea. What do you think Tirukural means by that? It's not the gift, it's the merit of the recipient. If you give $100, you would think it would automatically create more merit than giving only $50. However, the variable we are overlooking is the merit of the receiver. If we give to a man of great spiritual attainment versus a man of none, that adds a good deal of merit to the action beyond that from the amount being given. Gurudeva comments on this concept. Karma is an unfailing natural law, simply explained by this example. Give a beggar 10 rupees, you are not giving, you are investing in your future. Somehow 20 rupees will find its way back to you. He has given you the opportunity to give. When we give expecting to receive, the law will still work, but if we give 10 rupees, we will get back 10 rupees. Unselfish giving doubles the return. Giving to a temple is different again. Every 10 rupees given brings back 100 rupees in return. God pays a better interest. Giving is an investment in the future. It is not parting with something. Interesting. The final chapter of the section on family life talks about being famous, something everyone would like to achieve in life. It is chapter 24, and the Tamil title is Puhal, which translates as glory, fame, renown, or celebrity. Though in real life there are many ways that people become famous, in this chapter there is only one: through giving to the poor. This provides one last emphasis from Tirukural on how important being charitable is in the householder path. The first verse in this chapter reads, "Give to the poor and become praiseworthy. Life offers no greater reward than this." Contemporary Hindu society is placing a great deal of emphasis on accumulating wealth. Therefore, it is important for parents and teachers of Hinduism to emphasize the need to share some of that wealth with the poor and with deserving charitable institutions. So that's an important point for parents or grandparents, is to train the children and grandchildren to be charitable according to what they receive. A good way to do that is, for example, when they receive gifts for their birthday, they should give part of it to a charity. Simple time to impress in their mind this principle. An example that Hindu youth can easily relate to is Mark Zuckerberg, the co-founder of Facebook. A few years ago, he joined a group of billionaires, all of whom have pledged to give at least half their wealth to charity during or after their lifetime. As a start toward this, in 2012 and 13, he gave a total of almost $1.5 billion to charity. So the Zuckerbergs have a retreat mansion, shall we say, can't really say a home, a retreat mansion on Kauai, and occasionally give significant sums to charitable organizations in Hawaii, which is very appropriate. This completes the two themes of Tirukulal's thoughts on loving and giving in family life. As we all know too well, there is more to human nature than our ability to love and give. We also possess a number of negative tendencies. The need to harness negative tendencies through self-control is our fourth gem of wisdom. Theravada emphasizes the need for self-control by devoting a complete chapter to it in the Householder section, that is chapter 13, and entitled Possession of Self-Control. Tirukural 124 reads, "More imposing than a mountain is the greatness of a man who, steadfast in domestic life, has mastered self-control." The key phrase is steadfast in domestic life. This is the idea of being in the midst of young children and still maintaining self-control. Share a story. A few years ago, I met with a family that had 2 children, approximately ages 4 and 6. The 6-year-old was a boy and quite energetic and active throughout the meeting. At one point, the husband said that he found himself less calm and patient than he used to be. I responded by saying that it was natural to be less calm and patient with young children constantly running around, and that it was natural to become disturbed by them now and then, but that the important point was not to act when you were disturbed. We always need calm, intelligent communication. In other words, we don't correct our children until we have calmed down, which could mean waiting until the next day. First we become calm, only then do we communicate the correction. The poet also emphasizes the need to uphold virtuous conduct in chapter 14, entitled Possession of Virtuous Conduct. Tirukural 134 reads, "If a priest forgets the Vedas, he can relearn them. But if he falls from virtue, his high birth is forever lost." Tirukural 136 reads, "The firm-minded never slacken in upholding virtuous conduct, for they know the miseries brought on by such neglect." Theravada covers the concept of ahimsa, non-violence, in chapter 32, which is entitled Avoidance of Injuring Others. In the 10 verses of this chapter, he shares a number of approaches as to why we should avoid injuring others. The law of karma is one of them. Verse 319 presents this perspective. "If a man visits sorrow on another in the morning, sorrow will visit him unbidden in the afternoon." Verse 320. "All suffering recoils on the wrongdoer himself. Thus those desiring not to suffer refrain from causing others pain." In many chapters of the Tirukural, Vallabhar uses 3 distinct approaches for convincing the reader to follow the advice he is giving. Each type of advice motivates a different kind of person. What do you think these 3 approaches are? In the 2 verses we just read, Vallabhar is talking about the approach of showing a reasonable benefit or disadvantage for the action. In other words, in this case, a reasonable person will see that if he does this, he will end up harming himself, so therefore it is best not to do it. In the second approach, Vallabhar presents an action as simply the actions that high-minded people do. In other words, it is simply the right course of action. No benefits are mentioned. In some chapters, Vallabhar also uses a third approach as to why an action should not be done, which is that he creates an image of a very unpleasant consequence. I call this scare tactic approach. It is appropriate for individuals who can be motivated in no other way. Verse 317 is an example of the high-minded approach. The highest principle is this: never knowingly harm anyone at any time in any way. When we are harmed, there's a strong instinctive tendency to retaliate against those who hurt us. Vallabhar clearly states that this is not acceptable. Verse 312 states, It is the principle of the pure in heart never to injure others, even when they themselves have been hatefully injured. As we mentioned, a common justification for using violence is in retaliation for injuries to you, members of your family, your religion, or nation. There are many in the world today who believe that in those instances you have a duty to personally retaliate. However, Hinduism does not support the idea of such retaliation. Specifically, rather than retaliation, Hinduism favors using society's established channels for finding a remedy. Let's take an example from the U.S. Common movie plot. Someone shoots and kills your brother during a robbery, and the rest of the film is devoted to you chasing down the robber, shooting him in revenge. What then happens in the next life, the sequel? There is definitely a negative karma to be faced for killing in revenge. Perhaps another robbery will take place and you will be killed. Better to let the police take care of the robber. The policeman has taken an oath to uphold the law and therefore creates no negative karma if in capturing the criminal he has no choice but to injure him. Of course, if he injures him when he didn't need to, he creates a karma. So if he has no choice but to injure him. Example for students is if other students are misbehaving toward us at school, rather than misbehave toward them, we would tell of the matter to a teacher. As our two examples show, the fact that we do not retaliate, however, does not mean we do nothing to assure that the offender faces the consequences of his or her actions. Simply means we dispassionately channel our efforts through a person authorized to give a proper discipline or punishment. But what about evil people? Isn't it acceptable to harm them? From the Hindu perspective, all people are intrinsically good, even those who act in misguided, adharmic ways. What we can guard against is taking on the peculiar Western perspective that some people are intrinsically evil, the enemy. Therefore, it is all right to treat them in a different way than those who are intrinsically good. They are simply young souls and need to be disciplined by the justice system for their misdeeds, but not harmed by us. The Tirukural in verse 313 addresses this issue as well. Harming others, even enemies who harmed you unprovoked, surely brings incessant sorrow. Even when we control ourselves and do not retaliate, it is easy to still be upset with the offender and inwardly hold a grudge against him for what he did. While the Lord asks us to do even more than refrain from retaliation, he asks us to totally forgive him for what he did and furthermore return his injury with a kindness. Of his three approaches, this is definitely the high-minded one of doing something because it is the right thing to do. The poet expresses this in verse 314. If you return kindness for injuries received and forget both, those who harmed you will be punished by their own shame. So that's really high-minded. Good goal. Our fifth gem of wisdom presents one topic from the Way of the Renunciate section. It is from chapter 27, which is entitled Austerity. The word translated as austerity is the Tamil word tavam. The Sanskrit equivalent is tapas. Gurudeva gives this definition of tavam. Practice austerity, serious disciplines, penance and sacrifice. Atone for misdeeds through penance, such as 108 prostrations or fasting. Perform self-denial, giving up cherished possessions, money or time. Gurudeva's definition may bring to mind images of yogis in the Himalayas living in a cave or bathing in the winter in the freezing waters of the Ganges, which, by the way, are really cold. Though tapas does include these intense practices, it also includes easier ones that can be done by all. Simple form of tapas is sacrifice. Sacrifice is the act of giving up to a greater power a cherished possession, be it money, time, intelligence, or a physical object to manifest a greater good. Sacrifice is similar to charity, but has the aspect of doing without, some form of self-denial. An example is fasting for a day and giving the money saved to a Hindu institution. Second example is instead of going on a fairly expensive vacation, going instead on a budget one and making a donation to charity. Performing penance to atone for misdeeds is another form of tapas. This is done through such acts as performing 108 prostrations before the deity in the temple, walking prostrations around a temple or up a sacred path, and kavadi, penance offered to Lord Murugan Kartikeya. The various practices of tapas all have the same goal, which is purification. Then beautiful verse in the Tirukural, 267. As the intense fire of the furnace refines gold to brilliance, so does the burning suffering of austerity purify the soul to resplendence. Very nice. In verse 263, Valavar gives a humorous chiding to the many who do not perform austerity. Is it because they must provide for renunciates that others forget to perform penance? That's his sense of humor. Valavar is pointing out that there's a tendency to acknowledge that austerity would be good to do, but unfortunately there's also a tendency to put off actually doing it. One way to overcome this problem of procrastination is to perform austerity at one of our annual festivals every year. For example, some Hindus perform austerities for the 6 days of Skanda Shashti, such as fasting during the day, tending the evening puja at the temple, and only then having a meal. Others perform penance at Thaipusam. It is important to mention that carrying kavadi and other forms of penance should never be done for the purpose of impressing others. Rather, it should be done having in mind specific misdeeds you are atoning for, as well as promising to Lord Murugan not to repeat them again. So having in mind specific deeds you are atoning for and promising not to repeat them again to Lord Murugan. For the retired, long pilgrimages to holy places in India are a wonderful form of austerity. And then we have our second topic, 64 character qualities. Sensitivity is the character quality. How would you define sensitivity? The workbook gives this definition. Sensitivity is a delicate appreciation of others' ideas, attitudes, feelings, and natures. Practice it by listening carefully, watching facial expressions, and understanding subtle signs. The opposite is insensitivity. As we progress along the path, we become more and more sensitive. This sensitivity is a wonderful thing. It's like graduating from being an old battery-set radio of the 1920s and 30s to a sophisticated solid-state television. The sensitivity that you will begin to recognize is so refined and yet so strong. Being detached does not mean running away from life or being insensitive. It makes us extremely sensitive. When we have the ability to let go, we are warmer, more friendly, more wholesome, more human, and closer to our family and friends. Reflection. Take a moment to identify a few ways in which you could improve in sensitivity. And since our gems from the Tirukural was so long, we're going to stop here. Skip Yoga Swami. Om. Om.